before the first line of code, before there was a computer, before there was a screen, before the word programmer even existed, there was a woman who imagined a machine that could think beyond numbers. Her name was Ada Lovelace. But to understand Ada Lovelace, we must begin with something deeply human, with fear, not Ada's fear, her mother's. Ada Lovelace was born in 1815 in London into a household already haunted by genius. Her father was Lord Byron, the most famous poet of his age, brilliant, scandalous, emotionally volatile, and dangerously imaginative. And her mother, Anne Isabella Milbank, believed imagination was a disease. Anne Isabella was a mathematician, or at least as much of one as a woman was allowed to be in early 19th century England. She believed in logic, discipline, order, numbers, structure, and she believed poetry, especially Byron's poetry, was a form of madness. When Ada was only 5 weeks old, Byron left England forever. He would die when Ada was 8. She would never truly know him, but her mother believed that genius was hereditary and that if Ada inherited her father's imagination, it had to be controlled. So Ada was raised not on fairy tales or romantic poetry, but on geometry, algebra, astronomy, and logic. This was not normal. Most girls of Ada's class were taught music, French, etiquette, and obedience. Ada was taught angles, proofs, and equations. Her mother called this education a form of protection. In reality, it was an experiment. From a very young age, Ada learned that thinking too freely was dangerous. Her body was often ill, migraines, fevers, paralysis-like episodes. But her mind was relentlessly trained, and yet something unexpected happened. The mathematics did not kill Ada's imagination. It fused with it. By her teenage years, Ada was designing flying machines. Not metaphorically, literally. She drew diagrams of wings, studied bird anatomy, calculated lift and propulsion. She called this work flyology. Already, we see something extraordinary. Ada did not see mathematics as cold or mechanical. She saw it as a language for dreams. This is the core misunderstanding about Ada Lovelace. She was not simply the first programmer. She was something far more radical. She believed machines could one day create, and this belief would change the future, even if no one around her fully understood it at the time. But Ada did not grow up in isolation. London society, despite its rigid gender roles, was filled with salons, gatherings where science, politics, and philosophy collided. Because of her aristocratic status, Ada had access to these spaces, and one evening, at a party filled with intellectual elites, Ada met a man who would alter the course of her life. His name was Charles Babbage, and he was building a machine that terrified and fascinated everyone who saw it. They called it the difference engine. To most people, it was a curiosity. To Ada Lovelace, it was a revelation. But before we reach that moment, before code, before algorithms, before the future itself, we must understand the world that told Ada again and again, women do not think like this, and why she refused to listen. Ada Lovelace's childhood was not soft. It was precise, scheduled, measured. Her mother, Anne Isabella Milbank, often called Lady Byron, believed that emotional excess was the root of all suffering, and she believed that her daughter, born of a poet, carried a genetic risk. In early 19th century England, women were often described as naturally irrational, emotional, and intellectually fragile. Lady Byron rejected this stereotype, but in a very specific way. She did not believe women were equal to men in imagination. She believed women should be better than men in reason. So Ada's days were structured with almost military discipline. Hours of mathematics, hours of geometry, hours of logic exercises designed to eliminate ambiguity. Imagination was treated as something that had to be supervised. Ada was discouraged from reading poetry. She was discouraged from emotional expression. Even daydreaming was seen as dangerous. But repression does not erase creativity, it redirects it. Instead of telling stories, Ada built systems. Instead of writing poems, she designed machines. Instead of fantasy, she turned to abstraction. Her notebooks from adolescence are filled with diagrams, calculations, and speculative ideas, not just about math, but about how thinking itself works. She began to ask questions that most children are never encouraged to ask. What is a mind? Can reasoning be separated from emotion? Is creativity a form of logic we don't yet understand? These questions would later become central to computer science and artificial intelligence. But in Ada's time, they made her difficult. She was frequently ill. Some historians believe from a combination of stress, restrictive medical treatments, and possibly psychosomatic illness. She was often confined to bed, yet even from bed her education continued. Tutors came and went. Most were impressed, some were intimidated. One of the most important figures in her intellectual development was Mary Somerville. Somerville was a rare thing, a respected female mathematician and scientist in a male-dominated world. She translated and explained advanced scientific ideas for the English-speaking public, including works by Laplace and Newton. More importantly, she treated Ada not as a curiosity, but as a mind. Somerville encouraged Ada to think across disciplines, to connect mathematics with philosophy, mechanics with art. This was revolutionary because Ada lived in a society that demanded women choose between being intelligent and being acceptable. She was expected to marry well, to host salons, to produce heirs. Her intelligence was tolerated only as long as it remained ornamental. But Ada wanted depth. At 17, she was presented at court and officially entered society. She attended balls and dinners, dressed impeccably, praised for her beauty and wit. And yet, behind the polite smiles, she was bored. She wrote letters expressing frustration with superficial conversation. She wanted to talk about equations, engines, and abstract systems. This tension between appearance and intellect would define much of her adult life. And it is in this context that we must understand her meeting with Charles Babbage. Because when Ada saw Babbage's machine, she did not see metal. She saw potential. But let us pause for a moment. Charles Babbage was not a dreamer in the way Ada was. He was a mathematician, an engineer, a reformer obsessed with eliminating human error. He hated mistakes in calculation, especially those made by human computers, the clerks who calculated tables by hand. Babbage wanted precision. Ada wanted possibility. And when their minds met, something unprecedented happened. But before we move into that meeting, we must ask an uncomfortable question. Why do we remember Ada Lovelace at all? She built no physical machine. She wrote no finished program that was ever run. And yet she is remembered because Ada did something far more dangerous than inventing hardware. She imagined a future. And imagination, especially in a woman, was the one thing her society feared most. In the next part, we will enter that salon, the evening where Ada first encountered the difference engine, and witness the moment history quietly changed direction. The night a machine spoke to the future. The room was filled with candlelight. London, 1833. Velvet dresses, polished shoes, low voices layered with laughter and polite disagreement. This was not a laboratory. It was a salon, one of those strange spaces where aristocracy, science, and politics briefly allowed themselves to coexist. At the center of the room stood a machine. It was large, mechanical, unfinished, a mass of brass gears, columns, and levers. To most guests it looked incomprehensible, to some ridiculous. But when Ada Lovelace, not yet 18 years old, approached it, she did not see chaos. She saw structure. Charles Babbage had invited a select group to demonstrate a portion of his difference engine, a machine designed to automatically compute mathematical tables. At the time, errors in tables could cause ships to wreck. bridges to collapse, finances to fail. Babbage believed that calculation should not depend on fallible human minds. His solution was mechanical certainty. When the machine began to move, the sound alone unsettled people. Metal clicking against metal, numbers forming without hands. For many, this was unsettling. For Ada, it was intoxicating. She later wrote that she felt as though she were witnessing the future, not just of machines, but of thought itself. While others asked what the machine did, Ada asked what it could become. She peppered Babbage with questions, precise, technical, relentless. Not polite admiration, but genuine intellectual engagement, Babbage noticed. As she translated Menabrea's paper, she began adding footnotes, then longer notes, then entire sections. By the end, her notes, labeled A through G, were longer than the original text. These were not explanations, they were visions. In Note G, Ada described a step-by-step method for the analytical engine to calculate Bernoulli numbers. This was not metaphor. This was not philosophy. It was an algorithm, a sequence of operations designed to be executed by a machine. For the first time in history, a human mind described how a machine could follow abstract instructions to produce a result without human intervention. This is why Ada Lovelace is often called the first computer programmer, but this title is too small. Because Ada did not stop at numbers, she wrote something far more unsettling. She said, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." This sentence is revolutionary. Ada compared computation to weaving, not manufacturing, not calculation, art. She understood that numbers are symbols, and symbols can represent anything: music, text, images, logic. He was used to skepticism or shallow praise. Ada offered neither. She understood him. But more importantly, she went further than he did. Because even Babbage at that moment still thought primarily in terms of numbers. Ada did not. She began to imagine machines manipulating symbols, patterns, relationships, not just calculations. This was radical. The dominant belief of the time was that machines could only follow instructions blindly. Creativity, interpretation, abstraction, when these were human qualities. Ada questioned this boundary. Over the following years, Ada and Babbage corresponded extensively. Their letters reveal a partnership that was both respectful and asymmetrical. Babbage had the machinery. Ada had the vision. He was often dismissive of philosophy. She was deeply philosophical. She asked questions Babbage sometimes avoided. Could a machine compose music? Could it manipulate language? Could it generate something new? She understood something crucial. A machine's power does not come from its metal. It comes from its instructions. And instruction, at its core, is an abstract idea. In modern terms, Ada was thinking about software, decades before hardware even existed to run it. But this insight came at a cost. Ada was a woman operating in a space that barely tolerated her presence. She could not attend university. She could not formally publish under her own authority. Her intellectual legitimacy was always fragile, yet she persisted. In 1835, she married William King, later Earl of Lovelace. She became Countess of Lovelace, had 3 children, and fulfilled society's expectations. But marriage did not end her thinking. If anything, it intensified it. Late at night, after her children slept, Ada returned to equations, letters, and theoretical machines that did not yet exist. Her health continued to decline. She lived with chronic pain, treated with opiates common at the time, and yet her mind remained sharp. Then, in 1842, something happened that would define her legacy. An Italian engineer, Luigi Menabrea, published a paper describing Babbage's latest concept, the analytical engine. Babbage asked Ada to translate it from French into English. This might sound like a minor task. It was not. Ada added something extraordinary. She appended notes, notes that were longer than the original paper, and in those notes, she did something no one had ever done before. She wrote an algorithm intended to be executed by a machine. But more than that, she articulated a philosophy of computation that still haunts us today. And this is where Ada Lovelace truly enters history. In the next part, we will open those notes and read the first whisper of code ever written. In 1842, Charles Babbage was tired. Tired of funding problems, tired of politicians who didn't understand him, tired of explaining again and again why his machines mattered. So when an Italian engineer named Luigi Menabrea published a paper describing the analytical engine, Babbage did not rush to respond. Instead, he turned to Ada. He asked her to translate the paper from French into English. At first glance, this seems almost insulting. Ada Lovelace, brilliant mathematician, deep thinker, reduced to a translator. But Babbage knew something. He knew Ada would not merely translate. She would think. The analytical engine was fundamentally different from the difference engine. It was not designed to calculate a single type of equation. It was designed to be general purpose. It would have a store, memory, a mill, processing unit, input via punched cards, conditional logic, loops, in other words, a modern computer. But in 1842, none of these terms existed, and most people could not grasp the implications. Ada could.